Your phone buzzes. It's a text from a coworker. You feel it immediately until you see that small jolt in your chest, the sudden pull of attention, the sense that you need to respond right now. You open it. It says, "Hey, quick question when you get a sec." There is no deadline. There is no emergency. There is, in fact, the literal phrase, "when you get a sec," built directly into the message. And yet your hands are already moving to reply before you've even finished reading it. Or maybe it's an email sitting in your inbox with a small red, unread dot next to it. You haven't even opened it yet, and you can already feel a low hum of pressure radiating from your phone, like the email itself is generating heat. You know, rationally, that whatever is inside that email has probably been sitting there for hours without consequence. It will still be there in 20 minutes. And yet some part of your nervous system is treating it like a smoke alarm going off in your kitchen. Or maybe it's a task with no real deadline at all, something you decided yourself you should do today, and you find yourself rushing through it, heart rate slightly elevated, jaw slightly tense, as if someone is standing over your shoulder with a stopwatch. Nobody is. There is no stopwatch. There never was. Here is the strange thing about this experience that almost nobody examines closely enough to notice. The urgency you feel in these moments is not actually about the thing in front of you. If you stopped and genuinely interrogated the situation, is this actually time-sensitive? Will anything bad happen if I wait 20 minutes? Is there a real deadline here? The answer in the vast majority of cases is no. And yet the felt sense of urgency is completely real. Your heart rate actually elevates. Your attention actually narrows. Your body actually mobilizes resources as if responding to something genuinely time-critical. You are not imagining this feeling, but you are misinterpreting its source. The urgency is real. The reason for it is not. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your brain manufactures urgency completely disconnected from your actual circumstances, why it happens dozens of times a day in modern life, and the specific technique, the Urgency Recalibration Method, that lets you interrupt the false alarm before it hijacks your nervous system. This is going to change how every notification, every message, and every self-imposed deadline feels to you. Let's get into it. Your brain's alarm system was never built for this world. To understand fake urgency, you need to understand the actual biological system generating it. And that system was built for an environment that no longer exists. Deep in your brainstem sits a small structure called the locus coeruleus. It is one of the primary sources of norepinephrine in your brain, the neurochemical responsible for arousal, alertness, and the mobilization of attention and physical resources in response to potentially significant events. The locus coeruleus works in close partnership with your amygdala, the brain's rapid threat detection center. Together, these two structures form what is essentially your brain's alarm system, designed to detect potential threats in your environment and instantly flood your body with the chemical signals needed to respond. This system evolved over millions of years in an environment where the threats it needed to detect were almost universally physical, immediate, and genuinely high stakes. A rustle in the grass that might be a predator, a sudden movement at the edge of your vision, a loud noise that might signal danger. In that environment, a hair-trigger alarm system that fired instantly and intensely at any ambiguous signal was an enormous survival advantage. The cost of a false alarm, a brief unnecessary stress response, was trivial. The cost of a missed real threat could be fatal. Evolution optimized hard in the direction of triggering easily and often. Here is the problem. That exact same alarm system with the exact same hair trigger sensitivity is still running in your brain today. It has not been updated. It cannot tell the difference between a genuine survival threat and a notification sound. It cannot distinguish between an actual predator and an email with a slightly formal subject line. The amygdala and locus coeruleus evaluate incoming stimuli based on ancient pattern-matching criteria. Sudden, unexpected, potentially significant, status-relevant, socially evaluative, and modern digital life is essentially a machine for generating an endless stream of stimuli that match those criteria perfectly, while carrying none of the actual stakes those criteria were designed to detect. A notification sound is sudden and unexpected. A message from your boss is socially evaluative and status relevant. An unread email represents an unresolved, ambiguous situation. And your brain's threat system treats unresolved ambiguity itself as a low-grade threat signal because in the ancestral environment, unresolved ambiguity about your social standing or environmental safety was genuinely dangerous. Your alarm system fires. Norepinephrine floods your system, your sympathetic nervous system activates, and you experience this as urgency, a felt sense that something needs your attention right now, even though the actual content of the triggering stimulus is almost always completely benign. This is not a flaw in your character. It is not evidence that you are an anxious person or bad at managing stress. It is a smoke detector going off because you made toast. The detector is functioning exactly as designed. It is simply detecting the wrong things in the wrong context at a catastrophic frequency because the environment it is operating in is nothing like the one it evolved for. The average person checks their phone over 90 times a day and receives dozens of notifications, each one a potential trigger for this exact alarm sequence. You are not occasionally experiencing false urgency. You are living inside a continuous bombardment of false alarms, each one small, each one largely unnoticed individually, but cumulatively producing the chronic low-grade sense of pressure and rush that defines modern daily experience for so many people. Now let's fix it. The Urgency Recalibration Method. 4 mechanisms. Mechanism 1. The urgency audit. Separate the feeling from the fact. The first step in recalibrating a false alarm system is learning to consciously distinguish between the felt sense of urgency and the actual factual urgency of the situation. These two things are processed by completely different brain systems and they frequently disagree with each other. But most people never pause long enough to notice the disagreement. The felt sense of urgency is generated rapidly, automatically, and below conscious awareness by the amygdala and locus coeruleus, as we just covered. The factual urgency, whether something genuinely has a time-sensitive deadline with real consequences for delay, is something only your prefrontal cortex can evaluate through slower, deliberate, conscious reasoning. The amygdala's alarm fires in milliseconds. The prefrontal cortex's factual assessment takes a few seconds of deliberate thought. If you never engage the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala's alarm simply wins by default every single time because it gets there first and nothing challenges it. The technique is the urgency audit. The moment you feel that jolt of urgency, from a notification, a message, a self-imposed task, pause for 10 seconds and ask 3 specific questions out loud or in writing. What is the actual deadline here, if any? What specifically would happen if I responded to this in 2 hours instead of 2 minutes? Is this urgency coming from the content of the situation or from the alarm signal itself? This sounds almost too simple to matter. The neuroscience says otherwise. The act of engaging your prefrontal cortex in deliberate evaluation directly inhibits amygdala activity. This is the same prefrontal amygdala inverse relationship we've covered before, and it applies just as powerfully here. You are not just thinking calmly about the situation, you are biologically down-regulating the alarm system that generated the false urgency in the first place. Most of the time, the honest answer to these 3 questions reveals that the urgency has no factual basis whatsoever. The message can wait. The email can wait. The task has no real deadline. The alarm was false. And naming that explicitly, out loud, specifically, measurably, reduces the physiological intensity of the urgency signal within seconds. Mechanism 2. The response delay. Break the reflexive reaction loop. Here is something almost nobody realizes about urgency. The compulsion to respond immediately is not actually driven by the importance of responding immediately. It is driven by the discomfort of the alarm signal itself. Responding to the notification doesn't resolve an actual problem in most cases. It resolves the unpleasant feeling of the alarm being active. You are not solving the email's content. You are turning off the smoke detector by opening a window, regardless of whether there was ever a fire. This is a behavioral pattern called negative reinforcement. The urgency feeling is aversive. Responding to the trigger makes the feeling stop. Your brain learns through repeated experience that immediate response equals relief. Over time, this creates a powerful conditioned reflex. Notification arrives, urgency spikes, you respond instantly, relief follows. That strengthens every single time it is repeated, regardless of whether the underlying content ever actually required urgency in the first place. The way to break a conditioned reflex loop is not to suppress the urge through willpower in the moment. Willpower is unreliable and depletable, as we've covered in other videos. The way to break it is to introduce a deliberate delay between the trigger and the response repeatedly, until the brain learns that the urgency signal does not require immediate action to resolve, that it actually fades on its own, given a small amount of time, without you needing to do anything at all. The technique is the response delay. When you feel the urgency spike from a notification or message that you've already confirmed through the urgency audit has no genuine deadline, deliberately wait a specific, predetermined amount of time before responding. Start with 10 minutes. The goal is not to ignore the message forever. It is to prove to your nervous system through direct repeated experience that the urgency fades whether or not you act on it. After the 10 minutes, notice how the intensity of the original urgency feeling has changed. In the vast majority of cases, it will have dropped substantially or disappeared entirely. This is the data your brain needs. Each time you experience this, urgency rises, you wait, urgency falls without consequence, you are weakening the conditioned reflex that links notification to immediate response. Over several weeks, the baseline intensity of your urgency response to non-critical triggers measurably decreases. Mechanism 3. The negativity bias filter. Your brain assumes the worst by default. A significant amount of false urgency is generated not just by the alarm system's hair trigger sensitivity, but by a specific cognitive bias that fills in the ambiguous gaps of incomplete information with worst-case assumptions. This is called negativity bias, and it is one of the most well-documented patterns in cognitive psychology. Here is how it operates in the context of urgency. You receive an ambiguous message. Can we talk later? Or we need to discuss something? Or simply an unopened email from your boss with no subject line preview visible. Your brain, lacking complete information, does not default to a neutral or positive interpretation. It defaults to the most threatening, plausible interpretation available. This is not pessimism as a personality trait. It is a hardwired cognitive shortcut that evolved because, in an ancestral environment, assuming the worst about an ambiguous threat signal and being wrong cost you very little, while assuming the best about an ambiguous threat signal and being wrong could cost you your life. The asymmetry of consequences shaped a permanent bias toward threat assumption under uncertainty. In modern life, this bias runs constantly and almost entirely without your awareness, generating fake urgency by filling every ambiguous gap with imagined catastrophe. The unopened email becomes, in your unconscious threat assessment, potential bad news. The vague message becomes a sign of impending conflict. The unanswered text becomes evidence that you've upset someone. None of these interpretations are based on actual evidence. All of them are the default output of a bias that evolved to protect you from saber-toothed cats and is now applied to your Slack notifications. The technique is the negativity bias filter, a deliberate cognitive practice of generating at least two equally plausible neutral or positive interpretations before accepting the threatening one your brain offered by default. When an ambiguous, urgency-generating signal arrives, explicitly ask, what is a neutral explanation for this? What is a positive explanation for this? This is not toxic positivity or denial. It is correcting for a known, documented cognitive bias by deliberately engaging the prefrontal cortex's capacity for balanced probabilistic reasoning rather than accepting the amygdala's threat-biased first guess as fact. Research on cognitive reappraisal techniques consistently shows that generating alternative interpretations for ambiguous stressors significantly reduces the physiological stress response associated with those stressors, even when the alternative interpretations are not confirmed to be true. The brain responds to the plausibility of a less threatening explanation, not just to certainty. Mechanism 4. The values check. Distinguish urgent from important. This final mechanism addresses something slightly different from the previous three. Where the first three mechanisms target the false alarm itself, this one targets a related but distinct problem: the chronic confusion between urgency and importance that drives many people to spend their energy on the loudest demands rather than the most meaningful ones. Urgency and importance are completely independent variables. Something can be urgent and unimportant. A notification demanding immediate attention about something that, in the broader context of your life and goals, matters very little. And something can be important and not urgent. The kind of deep, meaningful work that has no external deadline pressing on it, no notification announcing its presence, and therefore consistently loses out to the louder, more urgent feeling demands competing for your attention. Your brain's alarm system, by design, prioritizes urgency signals over importance evaluation. This made sense in an ancestral context where urgent threats were almost always also the most important things to attend to in that moment. In modern life, this default prioritization is frequently backwards. The urgent thing, the notification, the message, the small fire that feels like it needs putting out, is very often the least important thing in your day. The important thing, the project that actually moves your life forward, the relationship that needs real attention, the goal that matters in 6 months, generates no alarm signal at all and is therefore systematically deprioritized by a brain that is wired to respond to volume, not significance. The technique is the values check performed once daily, ideally during your morning planning. Before engaging with any urgent feeling inputs, explicitly write down the 1 or 2 things that are genuinely important today based on your actual goals and values, independent of how urgent anything currently feels. Then, throughout the day, when a false urgency signal competes for your attention, you have an explicit reference point to check it against. Is responding to this notification more important than the thing I identified this morning as actually mattering? In the overwhelming majority of cases, the answer is no. Having decided this in advance, during a calm planning moment, rather than in the heat of an alarm response, makes the decision dramatically easier to execute consistently. If this is explaining something you've felt for years without being able to name it, hit that like button and tell me in the comments. What's the thing that always feels urgent to you, but probably isn't? I want to know. Your Urgency Recalibration Method cheat sheet. Mechanism 1, the urgency audit. Pause 10 seconds and separate the felt urgency from the factual urgency. Ask what the real deadline is, if any. Mechanism 2, the response delay. Wait a predetermined amount of time before responding to non-critical triggers. Prove to your nervous system that the urgency fades on its own. Mechanism 3, the negativity bias filter. Generate at least 2 neutral or positive interpretations before accepting the threatening one your brain defaulted to. Mechanism 4, the values check. Identify what's genuinely important each morning, independent of urgency. Use it as your reference point against false alarms all day. The constant sense of rush you've been carrying around is not who you are. It is not a personality trait, a character flaw, or evidence that you're simply a more anxious person than everyone else. It is an ancient alarm system exquisitely tuned for a world of physical predators and immediate survival threats, firing constantly and indiscriminately inside a world made almost entirely of notifications, ambiguous messages, and self-imposed deadlines that carry none of the stakes the system was built to detect. You cannot delete this alarm system. It is wired into the deepest, oldest parts of your brain, and it served your ancestors well for a very long time. But you can recalibrate how much authority you give it. You can build the habit of pausing, questioning, delaying, and checking. 4 small interruptions that, applied consistently, retrain your nervous system to reserve its full alarm response for things that actually deserve it. Imagine moving through your day without that low hum of constant pressure. Imagine reading a message and feeling nothing more than mild curiosity instead of a jolt of dread that is not a fantasy. That is what a recalibrated alarm system feels like, and you now have the exact method to build it. Like this video if you finally understand where that constant rushed feeling has been coming from. Subscribe, because next week we are breaking down the dopamine detox method that resets your motivation in 24 hours, and why most people do dopamine detoxing completely wrong. That one is going to surprise you. Let's go.